Welcome to the Minnesota Rovers Tuesday evening presentation. Minnesota Rovers is an outdoors club based in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Our members organize trips that range from 1 hour to 2 weeks in Minnesota or further afield. Examples of our activities include hiking, biking, backpacking, skiing, snowshoeing, paddling, and rock climbing. We also organize conservation and trail clearing trips. Our members have experience and skills in many outdoor activities, so if you want to learn a new outdoor activity, we can probably help you. For more information, go to mnrovers.org. Now let's move on to this week's presentation.
Tonight, you're here to hear from Jerry and me about There and Back Again, a road trip from Minneapolis to Portland and back. Jerry Wallace joined the Rovers in 2017. He has served on the board and is currently serving as president.
Stacey Grimes joined in 2007 and has served on the board in many positions since 2008.
We've had a lot of fun Rovers experiences, but our favorite has probably been the 2 canal boat trips we took to England. So please welcome Jerry.
And Stacey. So welcome to the title, There and Back Again, a road trip from Minneapolis to Portland and back. This is a trip we made for Stacey's birthday, Stacey's retirement, and my 4-week sabbatical plus 2 weeks of vacation. So I had 6 weeks off from work. Our goal was to visit a friend in Portland and see a few sights along the way.
Actually, I had said, we're going to see everything there is to see between Minneapolis and Portland on this trip. Yeah.
Well, a little side thing here, we didn't put it in the script, but Stacey says, where are you taking me? And I said, well, let's go west. And she said, could you be a little more specific? And I said, west is that way. And after I got smacked a couple of times, we came up with this. So here's a picture of me doing some pre-trip planning. And the idea here was to just get some general routes and possible places to spend the night, mostly early on in the trip, because the latter part was going to be a little more flexible. We wanted to get out to Portland by Tuesday the following week. We left on Wednesday because we wanted to host the Rover meeting that following Tuesday. We went out on the west, northerly route, and a slower pace southerly route back, looking for more opportunities in Idaho, Wyoming, and South Dakota. And we were also scouting for future trip destinations. Oh, I already talked about this a little bit. We were less flexible on spontaneous stops, the brown signs, historical markers, and all that. We did make it to Portland in 5 nights, as we hoped, and we did approximately 300 miles a day. It was about 1,800 miles out there. On the way back, we took 9 nights. And that, you'll see it coming up. We picked a number of just, look at that, let's stop.
So some facts. The trip took 18 days and 17 nights, and Jerry drove at least 3,854 miles, more actually because of the sites we went and visited off the road. And I forgot about the distance when we drove from Portland to the Pacific. We visited 3 national parks and 3 national monuments, along with many smaller attractions. Coming from the Midwest, it was fun and interesting to see the different wildlife, such as the pronghorn antelope, who were grazing in the fields like our white-tailed deer do. It was also fascinating to experience the many different ecosystems that we did. Sand dunes, mountains, ocean, rainforest, high desert, high plains, volcanic areas. It's amazing. In addition, we crossed 2 continental divides and traveled in 3 time zones. It's not on there, but the trip also cost about $2,400. We probably would have saved about $1,000 if we had been able to camp more.
So in this picture, Stacey made me pose, pretending to be deep in thought, planning. And it was a moment where I actually was focused momentarily. My main tools for this were, I have over there, the National Geographic Atlas, which has a page for every state, and Google Maps for the routing. We used Roadside America, which I didn't know about at this point. We'll talk about that later. On the road, I was the driver, and you can see in the picture, Stacey was the navigator. And hidden out of the picture at her feet was brochures and more maps. Yes, all the stuff, and snacks in case I got hungry.
And I will also mention that the National Geographic Atlas was the Adventure Edition, which has a lot of information that we all would want to see. So our first night was at Buffalo River State Park near Moorhead, Minnesota. We had planned for a short drive. The first day, we left very late in the day. And in the morning, on our first morning, we took a time for a short hike in the park along the Buffalo River. Early fall is, as you guys know, so gorgeous in Minnesota, and the colors were really beautiful. Like many other state parks, Buffalo River has buildings that were built by the WPA, and this building that you see was built in 1938.
Down the road from the state park was the Moorhead State Regional Science Center. It's an interpretive center with a full-mounted bison. You can hike nature trails near there. And then the state park is literally right next door, so you can wander across both properties. There's an observatory as well, and there are public events at the facility. It's part of the Blue Stem Prairie, Minnesota's largest remnant tallgrass prairie, and the sculpture represents that. As a side note, when we were there, I remember my daughter and I did a midnight hike at that place, and it was in January. We were snowshoeing, and putting my snowshoes on was bitter cold. But when we got into the woods down by the river, we warmed up so much that we were unzipping our jackets and taking our gloves and mittens off. And the sky was clear, so we had a wonderful starry winter night. Recommended hiking, snowshoeing in January. So we didn't do many stops in North Dakota because we wanted to get out to Portland. However, there's a handful of interesting features there that we took a few minutes to stop at because we're going to come back and see other stuff. So we stopped in North Dakota Visitor Center in Fargo, and yes, that is a display about the movie. And yes, that is the chipper that was in the movie. And yes, there is a foot sticking out of the chipper. Apparently, when they sold the props, a local fellow bought it, used it for a few years, then it sat dormant, and eventually it ended up in that little museum there. So features, as we're going west towards our next night destination, in Jamestown, we have Dakota Thunder, built in 1959. It's 26 feet tall, 26 tons of rebar and gunite, which I understand is concrete. You can see me standing there, and the top of my head is touching the chin of the bison, so that gives you a perspective of size. Down the road, Stacey found Sandy on Roadside America. I had never been there before, and we pull off the highway, and it's one of those where all of a sudden we see the head popped up over the trees, and it's 38 feet high, and we see Stacey standing. There's a little sign that says "Subject stand here," and closer to where I'm standing, there's a sign that says "Photographer stand here" for best proportions in the picture.
And this is the world's largest sandhill crane.
Roadside America. And then the next stop was Salem Sioux in the town of New Salem. She was built in 1974, 6 tons of fiberglass. Now, if you look closely, you can see the cables holding her down in case the wind gets really strong. And behind Salem Sioux, the top of that hill is the highest point around. It's a great view.
It's a nice hike.
Yeah, it was a very nice hike. Then we ran into this another attraction from Roadside America. The scientific center of North America, according to one study, is outside of Center, North Dakota, which is different from the geographic center of North America located in Rugby, North Dakota, and different from the new geographic center, and this is different from this picture, the new geographic center of North Dakota, located in Robinson, North Dakota. So must have been a lot of wrangling over who was going to be the center.
So as with many of our arrivals, we got into the North Unit of Theodore Roosevelt National Park in Western North Dakota pretty late, and didn't realize until the morning that the campground is right on the Little Missouri River. And you can see our campsite in the picture on the left. The river is less than 100 yards away behind Jerry. And on the right, we're having coffee at the river. We saw bison droppings along the trail when we were walking down to the river, although we didn't see any bison in the campground itself.
Has anyone camped in Roosevelt? Was there bison running through the campground?
Actually, the ranger told me if you get up in the middle of the night, hesitate a little
Yes,
bit.
hesitate. Yes, it's quite amazing, especially in August when it's the rut.
So after our coffee and after we had packed up, we hiked a bit of the Buckhorn Trail before leaving. It was a recommendation from one of the rangers. We had stopped into the little visitor center. Gorgeous views of the terrain, the buttes, the geology, and we were very excited when we saw our first bison. So you can see him at the end of that line, the arrow. We will definitely be going back to Teddy Roosevelt National Park. It was really beautiful, and we didn't spend nearly enough time there.
So here, this is a typical picture of our lunch stops. The back of Stacy's car was a perfect spot to make sandwiches and get out the pretzels or whatever. This location is the top of the world in Butte. Basically, it's nearly the highest point in Butte. That night, you can see our tent set up in Chief Looking Glass Campground, and this was a fishing access site just south of Missoula. It was the coldest night of all the nights we did because there was frost on the inside of the fly, and I didn't have gloves on when I'm taking the tent poles down. My fingers got very tingly. And if you stay here, you can't leave the park and get back in without destroying your tires. You can park outside and walk in.
So we've talked about Roadside America. So in North Dakota, I had run across roadsideamerica.com, which is this online site that catalogs various touristy things people can see in the US. Many of them are quirky, such as the world's biggest ball of twine in Darwin, Minnesota, or those 38-foot tall animal statues in North Dakota. But north of Missoula, we found two really amazing attractions. The first stop was the Garden of 1,000 Buddhas. And while it could have been a hokey collection of 1,000 plastic busts of the Buddha, that could have happened, it turned out to be something really, really wonderful. In the middle of nowhere, an eminent Tibetan Buddhist master and scholar envisioned and created this garden, which is meant to promote global peace. The garden has 8 spokes, which you can see in that picture in the upper left, each with a wall that has these statues. And each statue has a sign with the name of the Buddha, his parents' names, and the story behind that Buddha. It's hard to show you the scope of how big the garden is, but it's 500 feet in diameter, which is almost 200 football fields. And each spoke has 125 of those 2-foot statues. So it's like 60 down each side. Yeah. And then there's you can't see it very well, but in the picture on the bottom left, there's a statue. She's like 20 feet tall. I forget her name, but she's a special Buddha goddess or something. So, and she's under this like 25-foot roof. So it's quite amazing.
Quite a surprise. So then, not far from there, less than half an hour, was another Roadside America destination in the town of St. Ignatius, where we found a Jesuit mission of the same name. The church was built between 1891 and 1893 with a barren interior until Brother Joseph Carignano arrived in 1903. He was primarily the cook, but also had a knack for art. He painted a number of works similar to the St. Ignatius you see here across churches, schools, and convents across the region. This picture was off of their website, not one that we took. And as much as you see in front of you, there is as much behind you. And this work was done in the summers of 1904 and 1905, 14 months worth of work. I figure he was either cooking or painting. As an untrained amateur, no less. This picture, when it was taken, Father Maddock was the pastor at the church, and he said when Carignano became a Jesuit, he said he knew a little bit about art. Well, look at what he did.
It's hard because they're not very close up, but each of them really was a work of art. It was really quite something. It was like being in an art museum. So we stayed overnight at the Umatilla National Forest in southeastern Washington. This might have been the last night we camped. And today we're driving to Portland, Oregon. You've all probably heard that it's very wet on the western side of the Cascade Mountains, and then the rain drops when it goes over the mountains. It's very dry on the eastern side. And here's what it looks like in those 3 pictures on the left. You can see for miles because there are no trees. And the area, I was so taken with the geography of the picture in the upper left with the sharp upheavals that I had to read about it. And the area in the upper left photo is called the Channeled Scablands. Similar to how the glaciers impacted Minnesota, the sharp cuts were caused by massive floods from an ice dam breaking up repeatedly approximately 15,000 to 13,000 years ago. The resulting channels then left coulees and buttes and mesas and giant ripples. It was really interesting topography. So then as we headed west, we stopped in Dayton, Washington, and read about the oldest train depot in Washington being moved to its current site by capstan and rolling logs.
And when Stacey first saw this picture, said, "What does all this mean?" Well, they moved the station from one location to another by putting logs underneath it and rolling them across while the horse pulled a rope around the capstan you see behind it. We're lifelong learners, by the way. Speaking of that, the next stop was the Bonneville Dam, 40 miles east of Portland on the Columbia River. This was another Public Works Administration project under Roosevelt and was completed in 1943. The first dam built on the Columbia River and is now a National Historic Landmark. The array of dams is one of the largest hydro systems in the world. It's huge. It's hard to convey the size. It's 1,230 feet across the middle of the river. It supplies 500,000 homes with electricity. In addition to the dam, they have fish ladders so the fish can migrate upstream. And as I was learning about it, there was some discussion about how valuable that might be amongst the engineers building the dam. One fellow saying, "To hell with the fish, I'm here to build a dam." So next to the dam, the powerhouse you can see in the upper left was a visitor center, and that had a lot of info about the site. And as you walk from the visitor center to the powerhouse, which is on the west end of the upper left, there was a viewing platform for the fish ladders. We didn't see any because we were at the end of the migration. But this was kind of fun to see that. I've always wanted to see the inside of a powerhouse. Next stop was at Multnomah Falls. And this was where the parking area was stuck between the opposing lanes of traffic. Very busy. We stopped long enough to snap a few photos and then got out of there. It would be someplace to go back if we could find a time when it wasn't so busy.
So we were visiting our friend Julie in Portland. And in Portland, Julie recommended that we visit a wildlife sanctuary maintained by the Bird Alliance of Oregon, which is part of the Audubon Society. And we were just floored by the lushness of the place and told by the staff that the forest is basically a rainforest most of the year. It gets a little dry in August. Green plants, huge plants, moss everywhere. We found it interesting that Portland has a heritage tree program that recognizes trees for their unique size or age or historical or horticultural significance. And we ran across this tree in the sanctuary, which was number 359 in the program. And I tried to find out what its significance was, but I wasn't able to.
And you can nominate more trees into that program.
Yeah, so, yep. So here on the left, you can see Jerry's using his Merlin app to listen for birds. We didn't see many, but we heard a bunch. And then we also got a chance to hike in the adjacent forest park. It's a city forest park. And went down to what they called the Stone House. And you can see it's all painted over. Julie said that the vandalism to the Stone House has only happened in the past few years, and we would have loved to have seen it before it was defaced.
And so, quick note, this was at the bottom of a pretty steep valley with a smallish, largest stream, I would say, and there's remnants of a couple of dams and maybe a mill there. And I don't recall what this use of this building was.
So, yeah, yep. So on the right, you can see how plants really thrive in this ecosystem. Leaves literally as big as your head, bigger. Sure.
So in keeping with our lifelong learner theme and me being the engineering nerdy geek mind, when we headed out towards the Pacific, we stopped in Astoria, which has a museum. And Astoria is right where the Columbia River empties into the Pacific. It's the oldest city in the state and was the first permanent American settlement west of the Rockies. This is the Maritime Museum in Astoria, which has a number of interesting exhibits about seafaring vessels and maritime artifacts from way back to more modern things. That small boat I'm standing next to was something a fellow Jacob Hendrickson rowed 7,000 miles over 11 months, solo, nonstop, unsupported, from Nia Bay in Washington, Cairns, Australia. Yes, that's what I thought. And then you can see that next picture is of the Columbia. That's a lightship as opposed to a lighthouse. And it ran from 1951 to 1979. It was moored in a particular space out in the area. It had a crew of 17 who lived on the boat and worked in 2 to 4 week rotations. You can see in the upper right there, that's a picture of the compressor room for the foghorns, which were loud enough when they were going that the crew had to stop talking every 3 minutes because they couldn't hear each other. The bunk quarters for the crew was pretty Spartan. The officers had slightly better amenities, but there wasn't a whole lot of room.
So from Astoria, we went south to Seaside, also in Oregon, which is on the Pacific coast. Lewis and Clark arrived in Seaside in late 1805 and then started home in early 1806. The statue commemorates the Lewis and Clark Trail, as Seaside is considered to be the official endpoint to the Lewis and Clark expedition's journey. In the right-hand photo, we reached the ocean. We're still about 100 yards from the ocean because the beach is really flat, all that sand.
And that was almost 200 yards away from the city where we're standing there. It's just huge.
So on Thursday now, we left Portland. We had been there 3 nights, and Julie urged us to visit the Timberline Lodge on Mount Hood. She thought that we'd have a lot of fun there. This Mount Hood is just east of Portland. So the Timberline Lodge was the lodge shown in the credits of the movie Shining, The Shining, with Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall, if you know that movie. Unfortunately, a snowstorm had moved into the Mount Hood area, which messed up our plans.
So in the middle picture, there's a sign with a flashing light. When the light's on, chains and/or snow tires are required. We first got there and the light was flashing, so we did a quick U-turn. There was a visitor center half a mile away, so we went over there and added to Stacey's brochure collection. And then as we're driving back past it, the flashing light was not on. So we thought, should we? Should we not? So I started driving up, and as we're going up, I'm thinking this is a fairly steep road, lots of curves, and if it gets icy and wet on the way back, I don't want to deal with that. So we made a good rover decision and didn't go. And then also, for those that might be interested, we realized somewhere in that area that we missed the North American Bigfoot Center, about half hour south of Portland. So we'll have to go there next time.
So on our way to the ghost town of Sumter, Oregon, we stopped at the John Day Fossil Beds. There are 3 units, and we visited the Painted Hills unit. The visitor center was well done, and we learned a lot about the geology and natural history of the area. This is where we learned that rhinos and camels originated in North America. And elephants came over from Asia. The landscape was really amazing too. If you look at the photos, you'll see red bands and yellow. The red bands formed in warmer weather and are more frequent at the bottom of the hills. And then over time, the reds gave way to yellow soils that formed in drier times. This was really, the pictures just can't show it, but it just was really grand and awe-inspiring.
So Sumter is a classified ghost town, Class E, meaning that it still has a small population, and right now it's about 200 people. On the left is a gold mining dredge, and it actually went downstream, as I recall, and making its own way through all of the sand and rock. And as it dug up stuff from behind, from the front, it pushed it to the back and made its own channel. And the buckets you see in the bottom photo is big enough for Stacey to comfortably sit in. And while I was in the dredge, being engineering nerd, Stacey was panning for gold, trying to pay for the trip. And we did see some mule deer as well. And the train you see runs from McEwen to Sumter. It's about a 5-mile journey, and you can get a ticket as a tourist and ride on the train.
It's like the restored train that's along the St. Croix here in Minnesota. One of the highlights of our trip was Craters of the Moon National Monument in central Idaho. And for those of you who might not have noticed, we put maps in the bottom left to try and help you see where we were in the state. So one of the highlights was Craters of the Moon in central Idaho. For those of you who studied geology, it's the largest, mostly Holocene-aged basaltic lava field in the contiguous United States. In other words, it's a vast ocean of lava flows. And the Holocene epoch is the one we are currently in, so it's the most recent. The younger flows are from eruptions starting about 15,000 years ago, and eruptions have occurred approximately every 2,000 years since. Volcanic activity here is considered dormant, not extinct. And scientists believe it will erupt in the next 900 years, with the highest likelihood in the next 100 years. Craters of the moon has lava flows, lava tubes, cinder cones, spatter cones. It also has some of the best examples of open rift cracks in the world, including the deepest known on Earth at 100 feet, 800 feet. So if you're like a geology nerd, this would be the place to go. There is hiking at Craters of the Moon. There is actually a wilderness that people can backpack into also. And there is camping. There is a campground. But if you go camping here, bring an extra ground cloth because the soil is very abrasive. It's lava rock.
So space nerd here, Apollo astronauts trained here because they really didn't know what the moon would be like. So they were going to as many exotic geological places as they could.
So we were pleased to see references to Native American beliefs and stories at several places that we visited on the trip. At Craters of the Moon, a story is told of how a snake squeezed a mountain after it was hit by lightning. And this caused the stones to melt and fire to come from the cracks. At Craters of the Moon, there were also informational signs with welcomes in both the Shoshone and Bannock languages, and the art on those signs was all by Native Americans. So it just felt very respectful of the Native American tribes.
And this was one of the important destinations that we intentionally planned for at the beginning. So now we're on our way to Jackson with stops at St. Anthony's Sand Dunes and Teton Dam. The St. Anthony sand dunes were formed from sand that was originally deposited in an ancient lake bed known as Lake Bonneville. We did hike through that, and these are some of the photos from that. It's sand, so hiking is a little vigorous, if you will. Lake Bonneville was a large lake that covered parts of what are now Utah, Idaho, and Nevada. And over the last 12,000 years, all the weather, wind, erosion shaped into what we see here. Now you can see the tracks in the photos. It's used by ATVs, motorcycles, and horses. It wasn't very busy that day, so we didn't have to worry about getting run over. Ah, yes, Teton Dam. This Roadside America, and this dam broke in the morning of June 1975. And the pictures you see at the top is from a family who just happened to be there at that moment. The leak was reported at 7:30 in the morning, and by 8 o'clock, the dam was completely empty. You can see in the upper left, there's an arrow pointing to a D9 Caterpillar, pretty big machine, trying to move earth over that leak, like the Dutch boy trying to plug the dam, I think. And on the far right there, you can see it's just totally gone. And at the highest rate, the water was many times the flow of Niagara Falls. 11 people died, thousands, tens of thousands of livestock died, just a lot of devastation. And of course, there was much pointing of fingers and accusations in the investigations and discussions in the aftermath.
So from St. Anthony and the Teton Dam, which was in eastern Idaho, we went on to Jackson, Wyoming, which was one of our favorite places of the trip. We reached Jackson on Monday, October 21st, and we wanted to stay in a hotel so we could host the Rovers meeting that Tuesday night. Unlike most evenings, we arrived early enough to take a quick hike before it got dark. On the advice of an employee from the Jackson REI, we decided to hike up Josie's Ridge to a lookout for the sunset. We did end up turning around before we reached the top, but because we wanted to get down before the sunset. but we really loved what we were able to see. It was really beautiful. One thing we thought that was really cool is that this trail was part of the Bridger-Teton National Forest and starts right on the edge of town. And these were pictures we took along that route.
I was just going to say, we didn't put it in the script we wrote, but for me, this is one of the more memorable drives into this city because it was uphill, 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 and then downhill, downhill, and the classic switchbacks and all of that, and be careful of your brakes and that sort of thing. Stacy's little Prius was very happy because on the downhill, her battery was fully charged all the time. All right, so on Tuesday before the meeting, we took the Teton Road north so we could get into the Teton Range and have a look at those. The visitor center there, Craig Thomas, is a great place. You should stop there if you can. Exhibits about the geology and history of the Tetons. And as you can see, standing next to that snow pole, we have nothing to worry about. That's about 10 feet high. Endless views of the mountains as we drove north on the Teton Road. And then on the right there, you can see me at the top of Signal Mountain, which is, as I recall, about 7,000 feet up, highest point in the area, and great view all the way around. And interestingly enough, there was a cell phone facility at the top of that piece of rock. We did get into Yellowstone, but in the interest of being back in time for the meeting, we turned around because it would have taken another couple of hours to actually get into Yellowstone and look at stuff. Because from the entrance to Grant Village was 8-9 miles. So yet another thing to do in the future.
I hadn't realized before this trip, but Yellowstone is like right on top of Grand Teton National Park. Yeah, I didn't know that. So before we left Jackson on Wednesday morning, we visited the National Elk Refuge. The refuge was created in the early 1900s when human development disrupted elk migration routes. Its 24,700 acres support a diversity of plants and animals, in addition to elk. The visitor center is well worth visiting. It's very educational and has some beautiful artwork by a local artist, including a 13-panel mural that illustrates the 4 seasons in the Jackson area. We didn't see any elk because they hadn't migrated yet from their summer ranges, but we learned a lot about them in the visitor center and out on the viewing platform.
So after leaving Craters of the Moon, it seemed like we were seeing old volcanoes everywhere. It seemed like that hill over there looks like a volcano. That one looks like a volcano. That one looks like a volcano. And then we get to Thermopolis, and there's a hot spring. The town is adjacent to the natural hot spring. The city claims is the world's largest mineral hot spring. It's appropriately named the Big Spring and is located in Hot Springs State Park. There's a treaty signed in 1896 with the Shoshone and Arapaho that make the springs freely available to the public. Fun fact, Thermopolis is located near the north end of the Wind River, where it becomes the Bighorn River. Unusual instance of the river changing names because the early explorers didn't know it was the same waterway.
So the mountains and buttes and canyons we saw on this trip were really different from the relatively flat terrain in Minnesota. And I personally was stunned by the beauty and the grandeur of the various canyons that we went through. The Bighorns were another breathtaking place. The Bighorn Scenic Byway is a 57-mile route that carves its way through the mountains of the Bighorn National Forest. And you see mountains, valleys, meadows, forest, rock outcroppings, many rock outcroppings. And as the sign in the upper right notes, some of the rock is up to 500 million years old. There are multiple pullovers and hiking trails along the route, so if you want to, you can get out and take a little hike. The photo of us is at Meadowlark Lake, one of the many stops along the way. So this night we stayed in Buffalo, Wyoming, one of the many cute little towns that we went through on the trip. We saw a lot of cute, charming, historic little towns. Many of them had displays of public art. Buffalo was one of them, as you can see. There was also a trail system that went through town where we took a short hike along the creek there.
So I've been to Devil's Tower a number of times, and I've always had family with me. So we were driving and we wanted to get there. This time we stopped, and the photo on the left is from 6 miles away. And I didn't realize how stunning it is, how imposing it stands in the landscape. We stopped at the visitor center and learned that it was the first national monument. We hiked around the Tower Trail. It's about 1.5 miles. And partway through, you can see on the right some rock climbers. It's a popular destination.
I think that's Rob up there.
And then some photos at the base of the tower. You can see I'm flexing a little bit there under that rock. There's a Native American story about this where girls were being chased by bears, Kiowas. 7 girls were being chased by bears and sought refuge on a rock. They prayed to the rock to save them, and it grew upwards, making it impossible for the bears to reach them. The bears left deep claw marks as they tried to climb the rock. The girls were eventually rescued by an eagle. Or you could read about the far less interesting explanation that Devil's Tower is simply magma and erosion. This is a spontaneous stop, the Aladdin Tipple. Driving down the road, sign, Aladdin Tipple. Okay, Stacey, she said yes, and we went back to look at it. Small 5-car parking lot, and there's signs about it. Basically, the tipple is a mining thing where they sort whatever it is they're going to sell, in this case, coal, which the mine is directly behind the building that you see. Just one of those fun, interesting, oh, wow, let's stop. And then, again, we talked about earlier, the center of whatever. Here's one in the outside of Belfouche, not Forche, Belfouche. And where I'm standing is about 200 yards from the road in the middle of a field.
And this is the true center of the nation.
Okay, fine.
So another beautiful canyon, Spearfish Canyon Scenic Byway in western South Dakota was basically the last thing we saw before we headed home. We had decided we could visit western South Dakota pretty easily on another trip, so we didn't spend any time in the Badlands or Custer State Park. Spearfish Canyon Scenic Byway is just off of Interstate 90 in South Dakota on the eastern edge of the Black Hills National Forest. It's a 19-mile route along Spearfish Creek, and it features steep canyon walls that rise up about 1,000 feet and is known for its beautiful scenery, including cliffs, a creek, and a forest. We saw the only mountain goats on this trip when we stopped to photograph Bridal Veil Falls.
Quick note here, I would not go here during Sturgis Bike Week, which is typical, okay, the first week of August, because motorcycles everywhere. And in fact, the rangers at Devil's Tower once told me that they start seeing traffic early July of people going through.
Wow. We had decided actually early on in the trip, and it may have been even before we started, that we were going to try and stop at as many historical markers and little museums as we could. So remember when your dad stopped for them on your road trips when you were young, and we all rolled our eyes and groaned?
That dad, no.
Yeah. Who knew that he was really onto something? Over the course of our trip, we learned a lot about the Lewis and Clark expedition, Native Americans, settlers in the 1800s, geology, natural history, volcanoes. Our dads would have been really proud.
So we saw all these places, but we also had some very interesting interactions with people at the places we visited. In Billings, we stopped for coffee. That was kind of a regular thing. Stacey, I need coffee. Okay, we'll find a place. In Billings, we found this place called Sacred Grounds. It was in the middle of Montana, where they offer a coffee house and retail establishment focused on mind, body, and soul healing. Walter here was one of the people who has a stall and sells scarves. In fact, he was preparing for a show while we were there, and he spent a few minutes telling us about the place. Then in Butte, Montana, in the upper right, we stopped for ice cream because Stacey saw an ice cream shop. It wasn't Dairy Queen, but similar. And as we're standing next to the car, a woman came over and asked about where in Minnesota we were from because she saw our plates. Turned out her husband was from Minnesota. And then she told us about growing up in Butte. And then a long time ago, kids used to slide down on cardboard in the winter. And one of the goals was to try and slide under the school bus.
Oh, jeez.
Which of course all ended when someone got injured.
Run over. Run over.
She also told us that copper mining was the big deal there. And one of the signs we saw says it is the electricity capital of the US because of all the copper that was mined. And then in the bottom right there, in the hotel in Portland, the manager and I were chatting, and turned out we both had scouting experience, and we were chatting about his growing up in Hawaii and his Eagle Project and national jamborees and all that kind of stuff. So we spent a few minutes talking about that.
So if you know Jerry, we were there for a long time. So afterwards and during the trip, we talked about what we would do different, what we had learned, and really our biggest lesson was that we would leave earlier in the fall to take advantage of warmer weather and to avoid closed campgrounds. We left on October 9th, which was beautiful. But as we went west and up into the mountains, it got colder. And not only was it cold, but the campgrounds were now closing. And so we ended up hoteling it a lot more than we had planned. If we had left when we had originally planned on September 20th, we probably would have been able to camp for much of the trip, and we would have probably saved about $1,000. So our second biggest trip was, and maybe you guys all know this, but to get off the interstates. There is
US highways.
Yeah, there's so much to see along the state highways. So much more interesting. And then there were some, random thoughts. Make time for the historical markers and this. Take notes. Take notes. You'll see over there that I have a book. I was the navigator. I wasn't driving, and so I was writing all of that time, because I knew that I'd get to the end of the day and I'd be like, okay, what was that place called? Where were we?
She was looking at a map, looking at Roadside America, writing, and once in a while she talked to me.
And give them a snack. But take notes.
The diary was very useful.
Yeah, the diary was useful. Your phone, where you can put little notes in your picture, is super helpful too. Like, what was the place, or what was the elevation, if that was the important thing about this, so that you can go back and refresh your memory. But take notes, be spontaneous. We also saved money with the America the Beautiful Pass, and also getting gas at Costco. So actually, we wondered how convenient Costco would be, and it turned out that it worked out pretty well for most of our gas ups.
Somebody had said
Can
something.
can you tell about the America the Beautiful Pass if you didn't already?
Sure. So we'll take questions now. We're pretty much done with the trip. Stacey wanted to say also, I'll get back to the America the Beautiful. Some of the campgrounds only took cash, so we'd recommend carrying small bills because we made some donations.
Yeah, yeah, it was $7. We only had a $10 bill.
And
Going
that's,
to a good cause.
that's fine. A lot of the places we went, we want to go back to because there was hiking, wilderness backpacking, a lot of stuff. We looked at this as an exploratory thing to find future places to go. And we're going to pick at least one and go there. Now, the America the Beautiful Pass, it's $80 for a year, or if you're 62 and older, it's $80 for the rest of your life. And it gets you into any national park, monument, most, I should say, not everyone, and it saves you the entry fee for the day, which Yellowstone on one trip I was at was $30, as I recall. So it's well worth having it. And then if you get the senior pass, you get 50% off camping. So instead of paying $14, you pay $7.
Right.
Melissa or Joni had a question. Okay, Joni, did you have a question? Same one? Okay. So I'd recommend the America the Beautiful Pass.
Yeah, and I will kind of tag on and say that most of these locations had recreational opportunities, hiking, wilderness for backpacking, kayaking. We just didn't have the time, but you guys would love picking any one of these places. They were really quite amazing. So I
That's the last slide.
think that is it.
The last
And
one says,
so
thanks for coming.
thank you for letting us share this fun trip with you.
Well done.
Are there any questions? Got a question here.
I'm just looking at the chat. I don't see anything.
We have a question right here.
Two questions. So when you said you saw the Bonneville area,
The Bonneville Dam.
yeah, just, in the past, I've heard about the Bonneville flats where they race and test cars.
Different part of the country.
Different, so I thought it was just a similar name.
Similar name. The Bonneville Salt Flats, I believe, are in Nevada.
Yeah. So.
And then the Bonneville Lake as well, where the St. Anthony Dunes were. So Bonneville shows up in multiple places.
Yeah.
Was it all the same lake or is it just like a big lake and these are random areas or is it just a coincidence?
Well,
Repeat the question for them. Yeah.
so the question was about the Bonneville name. Thank you, Ruth. Question was Bonneville name. There's the Bonneville Salt Flats in Nevada, Bonneville Dam outside of Portland, very distinct geography. And then the St. Anthony Dunes was formed as part of Bonneville Lake in Idaho, Wyoming, and Nevada, as I recall. So I'm guessing it's a local thing. I didn't think to look at that.
A lot of people like to call the place Beautiful Town, basically.
Oh yeah, Bonneville.
Oh.
Bonneville, beautiful town.
Let's see. Anything in the chat?
Question was how many days? Was it?
The trip was 18 days and 17 nights. It was 5 nights out. We spent 3 nights in Portland and then it was 9 nights back, I believe. We realized we didn't plan this, but we realized we spent the most number of nights in Wyoming. That was not something I would have guessed would happen. But we just happened to keep finding fun things to do. Jackson, we were in for 2 days. Jackson Hole is a beautiful area.
When I was planning, I had figured that would happen because as I'm looking across North Dakota and into Montana, it didn't strike me as dense with attractions as through southern Idaho into Wyoming.
What else do we have there? Anything?
You guys took beautiful pictures. Some of those pictures you took were amazing. Are you both photographers or is it?
Just camera phones. We're amateurs like the painter.
Yeah. I mean, I tried to highlight all of or notate all the ones that I took off the internet, but most of them were ours. Yeah, yeah.
Stop and see me after, Melissa, because there's other pictures. We took so many pictures. There's a couple I want to show you that my phone did just phenomenal job. Oh, and the Merlin app for birding. Merlin. It's a Lin. Merlin, like the bird. Cornell, yes. They're a big ornithology university, and I use that frequently when I'm out hiking. If you can identify a bird either visually based on size, where you see it, coloration, activity, or the thing that I use the most because I tend not to see them is you turn on your microphone, it listens and it identifies what it hears. It's awesome. It's amazing.
Hey, Jerry, can you hear me?
Yes, Julie, I can hear you.
Hi. Oh my God, this is the best presentation ever.
This is our friend Julie, by the way, that we went to see.
Hi, I've got my reading glasses on, so
A
I'm
little-
a little bit nerdy right now. But you guys, you're making me want to like quit work and travel across the country in an RV. I am so impressed by your presentation. And you've made me realize that there's so many things yet to be seen in this country. You've kind of brought back for me that there is so much that America has to offer. And all I need to do is stop and make a decision to go and see it. For me to get back in connection with people and nature. So, Jerry, I'm really happy that you gave me the link. And Stacey, I love you, and I'm so happy you came to see me.
And this was unscripted, by the way.
Well, fine. I'm really inspired. I'm just really, really, really inspired. I'm so happy I tuned in. Thank you both.
Well, thanks for jumping in. So Julie
Yeah.
lives in Portland, and we have a family connection
We do.
with her. And when Stacey said, "Where are you taking me?" and I, in a silly way, pointed west, Julie was the destination. And we
You
were
guys, stop.
able to spend a few minutes with her, and we're hoping to be able to do that again sometime.
Please do.
We got to meet her cats. So yeah. Let's see. Oh, and Julie said there's so much to see. This is only part of what Stacey and I envision in the future, because this was from Wyoming north, and it's not even as north as you can go. What about all the stuff that's down south and to the east and the northeast and all of that? So, Joni.
When you came back, how many days that is?
It was 18 days.
18 days.
From
What
October.
month did you, or when did you leave?
We left on October 9th,
Oh, yeah, that is kind of late in the
Stacey's
season.
birthday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it was
Birthday.
October, what, 25th, 26th?
Okay,
No,
but you would
27.
recommend maybe going in September.
We would go in September.
yeah.
I've been to Theodore, Roosevelt National Park right after Labor Day, and that was a really good time to go.
So the parks out there, we were talking to rangers in Jackson. And by the way, I learned Jackson Hole is not a city. I thought it was a city, and it's actually an area. And Jackson, Wyoming is the city. But as we were talking with the rangers, turns out that they don't close the campgrounds necessarily because there's no water. It's because there's so much snow. Because here, I would go winter camping because I can pretty much get anywhere. Out there, like you saw in the picture where the snow pole was so high. So earlier, like after Labor Day, before Memorial Day, are my preferred times to do a trip like this.
And then, yes, I was, I've visited my sister in Portland a few times, and we go out to the coast, and always amazes me because you get up and they're like at the chains on the car. You live in Minnesota, you think you know how to drive in the snow, but it's not.
It's driving out there is different than it is. In fact, a lot of those passes we went through, you saw the sign with the blinky light on it. There was a number of those that had the same cautions, but the weather was good enough where the roads were dry and we could easily get through. So,
They should change that all of a sudden.
right,
Everything goes to hell.
right.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment if you can hear me, guys.
Oh, yeah.
So great presentation, and you pulled it together really quickly too. So this is awesome. So, talking to geology nerds, I am one, I admit. I've been I've been watching a number of videos by a college professor out in Idaho, and he's been out to craters of the moon and all these other places you were talking about, and talking about there was a big Bonneville flood back so many thousand years ago. And they also still have regular earthquakes. So he's talked about some of the earthquakes they've had there. So Idaho is a very geologically active area and super interesting. So I really want to go out there and get his book of roadside geology and drive around there and look at some of the stuff out there. So I definitely recommend that if anyone has the option. So it's really and yeah, all the states out there are pretty interesting, but Idaho in particular, I'm really enthused about now.
Like I mentioned earlier, I was surprised at what seemed like volcanoes everywhere. And one of the things at Teton Dam when they were planning was there enough earth, whatever tectonic activity that would make the dam unsafe? But clearly it didn't survive for other reasons.
One thing I wanted to say about the gentleman that just commented on Idaho,
Yeah, Barry.
if he's interested in geology, like I am like I'm a rock hound. And so geology is fascinating to me. Like you talked about, like, the Devil's Tower, it's all like columnar basalt. But this gentleman was interested in Idaho. Um, the state gem of Idaho is the star garnet. And you can go there and mine for these garnets. And just to let this guy know that there are more amazing things in Idaho that you can see and do as a participant to like really get involved with the state's geography and geology. You can actually mine for garnets there.
Yes. And I think, Julie, you reminded me that when Stacey was panning for gold,
Yes.
there was also garnets she could.
Oh, yes. That's what I thought about when she was panning for gold. I'm like, there's garnets.
Yep.
So
And for the rest of you, when she was panning for gold, we didn't show it, but there was a ranger sitting there ready to take his toll on any of the gold or garnets you found.
of course.
Well, to be fair, he hadn't charged me. He was like, let's go ahead and do it, and then you can pay me if you find something, right? So it's like going to be $5 or something like that. In fact, I was just going to let me keep the garnets if I found them. So, yeah.
I have one more thing to say before I back out and just like let people talk, because I'm so excited about this presentation. Are there rovers in Oregon?
Are there rovers in Oregon?
Yeah, like
There are probably rover members in Oregon. If you were interested, Julie.
Well, yeah, like how do I get involved in something like this?
You could join for $10, Julie.
Okay.
$10.
Okay. Yeah, dude, I want to join. I'm like I said, I'm so inspired. I really want to join. And
well, we will talk about that for
We know
sure.
where
all right. Okay. All right. I'm gonna shut up now. Bye. Great
All right.
presentation.
All right. Well, listen, we've taken a lot of your time. It sounds like we're kind of wrapping up with questions. So thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for watching this Minnesota Rovers presentation. If you want to see more, please click on the link to our channel or the subscribe button below. Thank you.